I never saw it coming. Our marriage, or so I thought, was built on trust. We had been together for years, and while not perfect, our emotional connection felt unwavering. I knew her, or at least I thought I did, and I trusted her in ways I hadn't trusted anyone else. But then, things started to change. It was subtle at first. She seemed more distant, withdrawn. I chalked it up to stress from her job. We were both working long hours, and maybe she just needed some space. I ignored the little things, the late nights at work, the increase in her phone's battery usage, the occasional silence after I'd ask her about her day. I noticed that she stopped engaging in conversations the way she used to. Intimacy became less frequent, and when I tried to initiate it, she seemed distracted or disinterested. But I told myself this was just a phase. She was probably just stressed. It wasn't until one evening, when I asked her again about a recent work event, that I saw the first real crack. She hesitated before answering. Then, in a seemingly innocent conversation, she mentioned being at a colleague's party last weekend. The problem was, she had told me a week ago that she'd been too tired to go. Her eyes flickered for just a second before she caught herself, but it was enough to make my heart drop. I didn't confront her immediately. I was too shocked, too confused, but later that night, I couldn't let it go. I asked her again, and she tried to deny it, but it was clear that she was lying. The realization that she had been lying for months hit me like a ton of bricks. Not just about the party, but about everything: her emotional distance, her avoidance, the little things she had said or done that I had dismissed as nothing. The feeling wasn't just anger. It was a gut-wrenching confusion, a deep sense of betrayal. How could she do this? We'd built a life together, a family. She had been my partner. And yet, she had kept this secret for months. The lies she told were not just about the affair, but about herself, about the woman I thought I knew. I wasn't just angry at her for cheating, I was angry at myself for missing the signs. I wondered if I had somehow failed her emotionally, though I didn't want to believe that. How long had this emotional detachment been brewing? Was it something I could have prevented? The emotional aftermath was even harder than the discovery. I was filled with a flood of emotions: grief, anger, disbelief. I wanted answers, but more than that, I wanted my wife back. Yet I couldn't even recognize the woman who had been lying to me for months. The affair was painful, but it was the emotional betrayal that hurt the most. She had not only cheated physically, but she had emotionally abandoned me long before the affair happened. I don't know what will happen from here. We've had some difficult conversations, but can trust ever be rebuilt? Can we move past this? The truth is, I don't know. I feel like I'm in the midst of a storm, with no clear way to navigate through it. It's not just about the affair, it's about the years of hidden feelings and unspoken truths. Right now, I'm trying to process everything. There are days when I want to fight for our marriage, and others when I question whether it's worth saving. One thing I know for sure: the road to healing, if there is one, will be long, difficult, and full of painful realizations. The trust I had in her was everything. I remember when we first got married, I believed that nothing could ever shake the bond we shared. We had been through so much together: life's highs and lows, challenges and celebrations. From the start, we had built a life based on mutual respect, love, and trust. Our relationship felt like an unshakable foundation, one that nothing could crack. It wasn't just about the commitment to each other, it was the connection we had, the deep emotional safety that came from knowing we could be vulnerable with one another without fear of judgment or betrayal. I thought I knew her better than anyone else, and she knew me the same way. Every morning, we would talk about the little things in life, from what we were having for breakfast to the dreams we had for our future. We had our routines comfortable and familiar. I never questioned the foundation we'd built. That's why, when I started noticing little changes, I refused to believe they were anything serious. I thought, it's just a phase, or she's probably tired from work. We had both been working hard, sometimes long hours, so naturally, she was often exhausted. At least, that's what I told myself. She began staying later at the office, then leaving earlier, almost like she was avoiding something at home. I remember once jokingly asking her if she was having an affair with her job. She laughed, but there was a slight nervousness in her voice. She'd smile, brush it off, and assure me that it was just a busy time. But it lingered in my mind. Maybe it was nothing, but the silence after those words didn't sit right with me. She became less engaged in our conversations, and at times, it felt like I was talking to a stranger. Her responses were short, distracted, almost as if her mind was elsewhere. It wasn't like her at all. She used to be so present, so involved in what I had to say. At first, I thought, maybe it's just the stress of life catching up with her. We'd always been able to weather storms together. So, why would I suddenly think things had changed? But as time went on, the cracks started to widen, and I couldn't ignore the shift in her behavior. There were fewer long talks at night, fewer moments of intimacy, and a lot more excuses. When I asked about her day, she would offer brief answers or quickly change the subject, like she was avoiding something. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was too busy or too caught up in my own life to notice her struggles. I began second-guessing myself. Was I not being supportive enough? Was I somehow causing her to retreat? The doubt crept in slowly, but I pushed it away, telling myself I was just overthinking things. She's tired, she's stressed, that's all. Nothing to worry about. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There were moments when I'd catch her glancing at her phone and quickly turning it face down when I walked into the room, or when she'd disappear into the other room when I was watching TV, suddenly too busy to sit down with me. And when I tried to ask her about it, she'd assure me everything was fine. "You're just being paranoid," she'd say with a laugh. And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. We were supposed to be partners in this life, weren't we? If I couldn't trust her, who could I trust? I remember thinking to myself, how could I possibly be wrong? She was my wife. She loved me, and I loved her. We had always been able to talk through anything. So, when these little shifts started to happen, I dismissed them as temporary. But they weren't. They were the first signs of something much deeper, something I refused to see for far too long. Looking back, I can't believe I didn't recognize what was happening right in front of me. It was right there in the distance between us, in the silence where there used to be laughter, in the way she pulled away without saying a word. But I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to admit that things weren't right. I wanted to believe that everything was fine, that this was just a phase. After all, what kind of person would I be if I couldn't trust the person I married? What kind of husband would I be if I questioned her every move? So I kept telling myself it was nothing. And all the while, I was blind to the fact that something was slowly breaking beneath the surface. As time went on, the subtle changes in her behavior began to grow more apparent, and yet I still couldn't bring myself to fully acknowledge what was happening. It wasn't that I didn't notice the signs, it was more that I didn't want to. I kept telling myself that it was just a rough patch, that everyone goes through ups and downs, and that we were no different. But deep down, a voice in the back of my head kept asking, is this really just stress? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how often I found myself justifying her actions. She seemed emotionally distant, less interested in our conversations, distracted when we spent time together, and most notably, her sudden detachment from intimacy. I would reach out to hold her or suggest a quiet evening together, but she'd either brush it off or suggest we do something else. At first, it wasn't alarming. People get busy, and people get tired. But as it continued, I began to wonder if it was something more. Yet, each time I asked her about it, she'd just say that everything was fine. It was always the same, "I've just been really tired lately, that's all." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the more she said it, the less convincing it became. I remember one evening in particular. We were supposed to have dinner together, but she had been running late from work. It wasn't unusual, so I didn't think much of it. But when she finally came home, she was different. She was distant, almost preoccupied. I tried to ask her how her day went, but she just gave me a brief answer and quickly moved into the kitchen. I watched as she busied herself with preparing dinner, barely looking at me, barely speaking. I could feel the space between us growing larger with each passing minute. It wasn't just her body that seemed distant, but her mind too. There was no spark in her eyes, no warmth in her smile. I tried again, hoping for a connection, but the conversation fizzled out almost immediately. It wasn't like the woman I had known. The woman I married was open, engaging, and always eager to share her day with me, no matter how trivial the details. But now? It felt like she was hiding something. And in the silence that hung between us, I started questioning whether I was missing something important. Could I be overthinking it? Was I just imagining things? Maybe it was just a phase. Maybe she was just stressed from work, as she'd said. Maybe. I wanted to believe that. But the distance didn't stop there. I began to notice how she avoided spending time with me outside of basic routines. It wasn't just the lack of physical intimacy, it was the emotional distance that began to form. We used to talk about everything: our hopes, our dreams, even our small daily frustrations. Now, she was closing off in ways I couldn't explain. I would try to engage with her, ask her how she was feeling, but her responses felt rehearsed, almost mechanical. It was as if she had built a wall, one I couldn't see but could feel with every word she spoke. I remember trying to reach out, asking her if something was wrong, but she'd always brush it off, saying she was fine. It was like she had mastered the art of pretending everything was okay, while I was left feeling more and more like a stranger to her. At the time, I convinced myself that it was just stress from her work life, or maybe she was just going through something personally that she didn't want to talk about. I kept telling myself that I had to be patient, that eventually, things would go back to normal. But as the weeks passed, I started to feel like a ghost in my own home. I found myself longing for the connection we used to have, and it hurt to realize that she wasn't reaching out to find it with me. There were times when I wondered if this was all in my head, that I was just overthinking things, but there were too many moments where I felt invisible to her. It became harder and harder to convince myself that this was just a temporary phase. There was something in the air that felt different. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure how to get it back. The worst part was, when I tried to talk to her about it, she would smile and tell me everything was fine. But it wasn't. I knew it. I could feel it. But she wasn't ready to confront it, and I wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. It wasn't just the distance that started to worry me, it was the lies. They came in small doses at first, subtle enough to overlook if you weren't paying attention. At the time, I told myself that I was just being paranoid, that I was imagining things, but looking back, I can see now how the web of deceit was slowly being spun around me. I remember one instance when I asked her about a weekend event she had attended. She told me she was going to spend the weekend with her friends, but when I asked who had been there, her response was vague, almost like she was trying to remember, but couldn't quite get the details right. She mentioned some names, but they didn't quite add up to anyone I knew. It didn't seem important at the time, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why couldn't she just give me a straight answer? Why did it feel like she was covering something up? When I pressed her on it later, she seemed defensive. She assured me that I was overreacting, that I shouldn't worry about it, and that everything was fine. Her words were smooth, practiced even. I'd heard them before, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself that I was making too much out of nothing. But that little nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to be careful not to accuse her, but also not being able to ignore the fact that there were inconsistencies in what she was saying. I'd ask her about the trip again, and she'd dismiss it, telling me there was nothing to worry about and that she was simply exhausted from work. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The way she responded too quickly, too smoothly felt rehearsed. It felt like a script she had perfected. Then there were the late-night texts. I had noticed her phone buzzing more often than usual. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was working with colleagues, after all. But then I began to notice that she'd pick up her phone immediately, check the message, and then respond quickly, almost like she was trying to hide the conversation from me. It wasn't that I didn't trust her, I just couldn't ignore the odd behavior. Whenever I asked her who was texting her, she'd give me a quick, offhand response, "Oh, just work stuff." And for a while, I accepted it. After all, it seemed harmless enough. But one night, I caught her acting a little too defensive when I asked the same question. Her eyes widened, and she immediately put her phone face down on the table. Something in her reaction didn't sit right with me. Why was she so guarded? It was just a simple question, wasn't it? I tried to tell myself that I was overthinking things, that there was no reason to be suspicious. But then came the evening when I noticed she'd left her phone unattended. It was charging on the kitchen counter, and for some reason, I felt compelled to check it. I hated myself for even considering it, but curiosity and doubt had gotten the best of me. I picked up her phone, scrolling through the recent messages. I tried to be quick, trying not to get caught, but what I saw was enough to make my stomach drop. There were messages from someone I didn't recognize, filled with inside jokes and an intimacy that felt far too personal. I don't remember how long I stood there staring at the screen, but when I put the phone back, I felt like everything had just shifted. The lies were no longer just whispers, they had become undeniable. When I confronted her about it, she tried to downplay it, saying it was just a close friend, nothing more. But the way she said it almost too quickly told me everything I needed to know. Her eyes avoided mine, and her voice trembled slightly. She kept repeating that it was harmless, that I was overreacting, that she'd never do anything to hurt me. But the damage had already been done. I couldn't ignore what I had seen. The emotional manipulation was starting to feel like gaslighting. She was twisting the truth, making me question what I had seen, making me doubt myself. Each time she lied, I felt a little more lost, a little less sure of what was real and what wasn't. In that moment, I realized just how deeply I had been manipulated. I had trusted her completely, but now, I couldn't even trust my own instincts. She had made me feel like I was imagining things, that I was the one in the wrong for even considering the possibility of something being off. It was like I had become the villain in my own story. Each lie made me question everything I thought I knew about her, about us, and about myself. It wasn't just the affair I was upset about, it was the way she had controlled the narrative, the way she had manipulated me into thinking I was the one being unreasonable. The worst part? I wanted to believe her, I really did. But the more I tried to justify her actions, the more I realized that I was just trying to hold onto something that was already slipping through my fingers. That moment, the slip-up, was the turning point. I had been dealing with the mounting tension for months, the little lies and the emotional distance, and I had been trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. But then, everything changed in an instant. It wasn't a big confrontation or some huge revelation. It was a simple, small mistake that shattered the entire illusion I had been holding onto. I'll never forget the day she let it slip. We were sitting at the kitchen table, having what I thought was a normal conversation about our weekend plans. I had been asking her about an event that was coming up, something that I thought would interest both of us. But when she mentioned it, she casually said, "Oh, that was last weekend, remember? I was at that thing with John and Sarah." I froze. I knew she'd told me just a few days ago that she wasn't going to that event. She'd told me she had too much work to do, that she needed to stay home and catch up on everything. But now, here she was, talking about it like it was no big deal. She hadn't mentioned John and Sarah before, and I had never heard her talk about them in the context of this event. At first, I thought I had misheard her. Maybe I was mistaken. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a slip of the tongue, a simple mistake that anyone could make. But the way she avoided my eyes, the way she quickly shifted the conversation to something else, made my gut twist with unease. I asked her again, trying to sound casual, "Wait, you went to that event last weekend?" She hesitated for just a second too long, and that's when I knew. The answer wasn't coming naturally. She was scrambling for the right words. "Oh, no," she said, I didn't actually go to the whole thing. I just popped in for a bit, you know? Just to say hello." But it didn't make sense. Why had she told me she wasn't going at all? Why was she acting like it didn't matter? My mind was racing. I let the conversation hang there for a moment. I didn't want to accuse her outright, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that was growing inside me. The little inconsistencies had piled up over the last few months, and now this one slip-up was like the final piece of the puzzle. Something wasn't right. I asked her to clarify. Her story kept changing, but each new detail didn't line up with what she had told me before. The excuses became more elaborate, her explanations more strained. She wasn't even trying to make it sound convincing anymore. The truth was leaking out in tiny cracks, but she was still trying to cover it up with more lies. I could feel my chest tighten as the reality set in. This wasn't just a small mistake. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when the truth finally surfaced. I confronted her then and there, gently at first. "You told me you weren't going to that event," I said. "But now you're saying you went. Why didn't you tell me the truth?" I was shaking, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I needed answers, but I was also scared of what I might hear. She looked at me, her face turning pale. She didn't answer right away, and in that silence, the truth started to feel even more suffocating. I could tell she was panicking, trying to come up with an excuse, but the longer she stayed silent, the more I knew. The facade was breaking. Finally, she admitted it. "I didn't want to worry you," she said, her voice cracking. She told me she had been seeing someone else. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't breathe. My heart raced. I thought I was prepared for this, but in that moment, I felt completely unmoored. I had suspected something for so long, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that I couldn't have imagined. The weight of it was overwhelming. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, to know every single detail. But instead, I just sat there, numb, staring at her. The woman I had trusted for years, the woman I had built my life with, had been lying to me, hiding something so monumental, and I hadn't even seen it coming. All the little signs, the offhand comments, the strange behaviors, they all made sense now, but it felt like too little too late. She had been emotionally pulling away for months, and I had ignored the signs, convinced myself it was just stress or work. But now, in the face of the truth, everything changed. I remember feeling completely disconnected from my own emotions for a while. I didn't know if I should be angry, sad, devastated, or confused. It all blended together in a blur. And yet, despite the pain and betrayal, part of me couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The mystery was over. I finally knew what was going on, but now, I had to figure out how to move forward. I had to process the overwhelming reality of her infidelity, and the worst part was knowing that it had been going on for much longer than I ever realized. I felt like I was waking up from a nightmare, but it was real. There was no going back now. The one slip-up, as small as it seemed, had unraveled everything. I wish I could say that after confronting her, everything became clear, that I understood the full extent of what had been happening. But honestly, it was far more complicated than that. In the days that followed her confession, I found myself battling a storm of emotions. Anger, hurt, confusion, each of them came in waves, sometimes all at once. I didn't know what to do with the sudden rush of emotions flooding me, and it felt like I was losing control of everything. I remember sitting there after she had confessed, asking myself over and over, how could she do this? How could she betray me like this? But the worst part wasn't just the betrayal itself, it was the sudden, jarring realization that the trust I had so carefully built over the years had been shattered. I kept replaying everything in my head, the little moments I had dismissed as insignificant, the conversations where she'd been vague or defensive, the lies that had slowly accumulated like a house of cards. All those little things that didn't seem to matter at the time now stood out like flashing neon signs, and I felt like I should have seen it sooner. But what hurt the most was the emotional manipulation that came with it. She didn't just lie to me about the affair, she lied about everything, making me doubt my own perception of reality. I had spent months second-guessing myself, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things, that I was just overreacting. She had made me believe that I was the one at fault, that I was the one being paranoid. Every time I asked her about her behavior, she'd smile and reassure me that everything was fine, and I believed her. I wanted to believe her. In the aftermath of her confession, I started to look back at the entire relationship with a different lens. She had built a perfect facade, one that I was convinced I understood, but now I saw it for what it really was, a mask. She had hidden so much from me, not just the affair, but the emotional distance, the lies, the manipulation. She had been lying to herself too, pretending everything was okay, pretending that she was still invested in our relationship. But deep down, she had checked out long before I had any idea. And the hardest part to swallow was that I hadn't known. I hadn't noticed the signs. I hadn't seen the walls she had built between us until they were already too high. I felt blindsided, but there was also a part of me that was angry with myself for not paying closer attention. I had trusted her implicitly, and in doing so, I had allowed myself to become blind to the truth. I remember the first few days after she admitted to the affair. I couldn't think straight. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman I had loved, the person I had built a life with, but now, all I could feel was betrayal. There were moments when I wanted to leave, to walk away and never look back, but there were also moments when I couldn't bring myself to do it. It was like I was caught between two versions of reality. One where I could walk away and never look back, and another where I was desperate to make it work, to fix things, to find a way to heal the damage she had done. The emotional conflict inside me was unbearable. She begged me for forgiveness, apologized endlessly, promising that she regretted what she had done, that she had made a mistake. But no amount of apologies could erase the hurt, and every time she said she was sorry, I felt like she was just trying to erase her guilt without understanding the depth of the pain she had caused. It wasn't just about the affair anymore, it was about everything that had happened before it, the manipulation, the lies, and the emotional betrayal. I kept wondering why she had kept it a secret for so long. If she had truly cared about me, why had she allowed this to continue for so long? Why hadn't she just told me the truth from the start? The truth was, I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. Every time I tried to picture us moving forward, it felt impossible. The trust, once broken, felt like it could never be repaired. But even with all of the hurt and betrayal, part of me still clung to the hope that we could fix it. I loved her, and I couldn't just shut that off overnight. It was easy to say I would leave, but harder to actually do it. It was easy to tell myself I deserved better, but harder to walk away from the life I had spent years building. I found myself asking if it was possible to rebuild what we had, to move past the affair and the lies. Could I ever trust her again? Could she even trust herself? And even if we could somehow rebuild the trust, would we ever be the same? Could we ever be the couple we once were? The questions were endless, and none of the answers brought me any closer to peace. All I knew for sure was that nothing would ever be the same again. Our relationship had changed forever, and no matter what happened next, it would always be there, lurking between us, the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation. It was impossible to forget. The decision to stay or leave is something I never imagined I'd face. The emotional aftermath of discovering the truth was a maze I couldn't navigate. Every part of me wanted to leave, wanted to walk away from the pain, the lies, the betrayal, but there was another part of me that couldn't let go, a part that still clung to the hope that things could go back to how they were. In the weeks after the confession, I found myself torn between anger and longing, resentment and love. Every time I looked at her, I felt a mixture of betrayal and the person I used to know, and it was impossible to reconcile the two. It was like my heart and mind were constantly at war, with no clear winner. I remember the first few nights after the truth came out. She cried, begged for my forgiveness, and promised she'd do whatever it took to make things right. But every apology felt hollow, as though it was something she knew she needed to say to save the relationship, not something she truly felt. I wanted to believe her, I really did. I wanted to hear the sincerity in her voice and believe that she was genuinely remorseful, but all I could hear were the echoes of the lies she had told me over the past months, maybe even years. It wasn't just the affair that had hurt me, it was the emotional betrayal, the years of manipulation, the way she had made me doubt myself. That was what I couldn't forget, no matter how hard I tried. I found myself constantly questioning whether or not I should stay. Could I forgive her? Could I ever look at her the same way again? Could I rebuild trust after it had been shattered so completely? I didn't know. Every time I tried to picture us together again, I saw the cracks, the holes where trust used to be. How could I build a life with someone who had betrayed me so deeply? How could I ever believe her again when she had shown me her true self, the person who had been hiding things from me, keeping secrets, and deceiving me? Yet, even as all these thoughts ran through my mind, there was still a small part of me that wanted to believe we could fix it. That maybe, just maybe, this was a bump in the road, a mistake that could be healed with time and effort. But I knew deep down that things would never be the same. I also had to face the reality that, as much as I loved her, I couldn't keep holding onto a relationship that was built on lies. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of someone else's secrets. Every time we tried to talk about the future, I would imagine her with someone else, someone she had been seeing behind my back, someone she had been hiding from me. The thought of that made my stomach churn. It wasn't just about her being unfaithful, it was about the fact that she had been emotionally unavailable for so long, so detached, that she felt she had to go elsewhere for the connection I had thought we shared. And that thought, that realization, cut deeper than anything else. The hardest part was realizing that I had been a fool. I had trusted her completely, and she had betrayed that trust in the most intimate and painful way possible. And now, I was left with the mess of emotions, the confusion, the heartbreak. I couldn't trust myself, let alone her. Every moment we spent together after that felt like a test. Could I trust her again, or was this all just a temporary reprieve from the inevitable? How could I ever feel safe again in a relationship that had been built on deception? We tried to go to therapy together, but it didn't feel right. She was apologetic, she was remorseful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too little, too late. I wasn't sure if she was genuinely sorry or if she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. There were moments when I could see glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with, but they were fleeting, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was only holding on to the past. It became clear that the damage had been done, and no amount of therapy or apologies could erase the betrayal I felt. I remember one session in particular. The therapist asked me how I felt about the possibility of moving forward. I was silent for a long time, just sitting there, trying to gather my thoughts. But all I could feel was a deep, gnawing sadness. I realized then that staying wasn't the right choice for me anymore. The person I had trusted had become someone I didn't recognize, and no matter how much I loved her, I couldn't continue pretending that things were okay. I wasn't sure if I could ever heal from the betrayal, but I knew I couldn't keep living in this toxic cycle of doubt, pain, and broken promises. I had to let go. I had to put myself first for once. Leaving wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't a clean break, but it was the only choice I could make for my own well-being. The idea of being alone was terrifying, but the idea of staying in a relationship that had broken me down emotionally was even worse. And so, despite everything, I knew it was time to walk away. I couldn't fix what was broken, and I couldn't rebuild something that was built on lies. The hardest part was knowing that I had to let go of someone I had once loved deeply, but in the end, I realized I couldn't hold on to a relationship that no longer served me. The decision to leave was heartbreaking, but it was also the only way forward.